This is lecture number 100 in the ABCs of Communism series, and this batch of lectures we're doing right now it supports, or will support, the Volume 7, Communism in Europe, when it appears in a few months. Now, our topic today is the Iberian Neolithic Revolution, and that includes the stages of tribal agriculture, simple chiefdoms, and advanced theocratic chiefdoms before that revolution is completed. Around 8,000 years ago, seafaring Neolithic colonists leapfrogged into Andalusia with their crops of cereals and legumes, as well as domestic animals. And they encountered people already experimenting with olive horticulture and pig and rabbit domestication within their broad-spectrum wild resource exploitation mode of production, with diagnostic ceramics of the La Almagra type. By 7600 BP, agriculture began to spread over the Iberian Peninsula, and archaeobotanical information shows great diversity in people's crops, hulled and naked wheat, barley, legumes such as pea, lentils, fava beans, vetches, grass peas, flax, and poppy. Now, this broad spectrum of domesticated plants with different requirements for processing and use proves that these first farmers had a working encyclopedia of agrarian knowledge, including how to deal with the risk of crop failure. By 6700 BP, the Cardium Mediterranean Neolithic pottery had arrived in eastern Iberia by way of Catalonia, the Valencia region, the Ebro Valley, and the Balearic Islands. Now, the Andalusian Neolithic homeland influenced many areas, most immediately, of course, southern Portugal. Praia de Benagil near Lisbon has several cave sites featuring early indigenous broad-spectrum wild resource exploiters, and they came into contact with interloping seafarers from Andalusia by 5800 BP. The maturing Neolithic revolution is also the stage of simple chiefdoms. Now, it was Karl Marx, you'll recall, who, working from the ethnographic record, discovered that it was in the chiefdom stages that people would have had to begun to separate into classes. And we know this because he says this in his book, published as the Ethnological Notebooks of Karl Marx, which you could get in most university libraries. As we've seen, the initial steps toward plant and animal domestication in the eastern Mediterranean can now be pushed back to the 12th millennium BP. Several waves of seafaring colonists established coastal farming enclaves around the Mediterranean basin, and along the way they encountered indigenous populations and their locally domesticated plants and some new endemic species. There was the total animal replacement by imported mainland fauna. Now, a familiar pattern with farming enclaves built in favorable coastal locales occurs first on the eastern and southern coasts of Spain by 7700 BP, and then on the Atlantic coast of Portugal by 7400 BP. Intensive exploitation of estuary resources persisted for several hundred years after the establishment of these farming enclaves, and meanwhile the spread of agriculture into the interior proceeded through colonial expansion, local adoption of invading Neolithic technology, and the interbreeding of colonist and indigenous populations. This acculturation included adopting the simple chiefdom social organization of the interlopers. Now, the Bronze Age of southeast Iberia is typical of the social organization of later prehistoric Europe. In the post-Surrett years, the Surrett brothers, we recall we discussed last time, a reconstruction has emerged about the mode of production from 4200 to 3500 BP in three regions. The archetype is the El Argar culture of eastern Andalusia and Murcia. The second is the Bronze Valenciano of the Spanish Levant and the southern Aragon. And third is the Mancha Bronze Age of the southern Meseta. Taking a look first of all at the most important one is El Argar. The evidence for the El Argar archaeological assemblage is mainly from coastal lowlands of the provinces of Almeria and Murcia. The Surrett brothers' mining operations were in this region, and the most important modern excavations at Gatas and Fuente Alamo have been conducted at sites first excavated by the Surretts. The mountains of the Sierra Nevada and the Sierra de Segura shelter the coastal zone of southeastern Spain. At present, this is the most arid region of Europe, with mean annual rainfall of less than 400 millimeters, making agriculture irrigation dependent. Throughout the agriculture area, sites are oriented toward land that could be irrigated, and in the arid sector, the cultivation of crops such as flax and broad beans would have required irrigation. Anyway, from there, the agriculture area extends westward into the uplands of eastern Andalusia that are windward of the mountain systems, and accordingly, the higher precipitation promotes dry farming. Paleoenvironmental evidence indicates that the climate during the Bronze Age was similar to that of the present. Now, as to the mode of production. The Bronze Age archaeological settlement pattern of southeastern Iberia shows hundreds of agaric villages every few miles along rivers and streams. Agaric settlements feature extensive defensive construction. The villages comprising these settlements are in tight clusters of rectangular houses packed on the crests of steep hills, themselves terraced on their upper slopes. These sites are each a fraction of an acre and deeply stratified. A few sites, such as Cerro de la Virgen, were built in the early Copper Age and the rest in the Bronze Age over a period of 700 years. Now, the long-term occupations characteristic of the agaric were based on the mixed farming of wheat and barley, supplemented by legumes such as peas, broad beans, lentils, and olives. Domestic animals included sheep and goats, cattle, pigs, and horses. This form of agriculture began in the preceding Copper Age. The exploitation of sheep, goats, cattle, and horses for their secondary products of wool and milk, and for their use as plow pullers and cart haulers, became the norm. Agaric farms were self-contained units engaging in a complete suite of production activities. Important to note, however, is that none of them exhibits a significant degree of craft specialization. The ceramic industry was primitive. Vessels were coil-made of coarse-tempered pottery that was fired at low temperatures under reducing conditions, and ceramic decoration is limited to finger impressions on the rims and applique buttons. The forms include standardized carbonated vases, bowls, and a variety of storage jars. Recovered fragments of linen and woolen textiles are homespun, and the loom weights are found in domestic spaces rather than in a proto-factory. Esparto grass was used to make baskets and cords. The chipstone tool industry consists mainly of unmodified blades and flakes, the main distinctive tool type being backed and denticulate sickle teeth for reaping crop stalks. Simple all-purpose stones of virtually any shape were ground and polished for milling, and groundstone axes were also produced. Even metallurgy appears to be a household industry. Arsenic alloyed copper ores were smelted in small ceramic crucibles found in domestic contexts. Only a few of these artifacts were made in each farm household. Trace element analysis of slags shows an immature understanding of alloying, as do the finished artifacts. What metallurgical production occurred was devoted to tools such as chisels, ornaments, and projectile points. A few arms, such as daggers and swords, were made that could have interchangeable farming uses. Now, there's a pattern of matrifocality, that is, a female-centered society. The agaric farmers buried their dead under the floors of their houses in natural cavities, stone cists, or large jars. These were individual interments, but in some cases they were double, that is, male and female burials. And radiocarbon dates on the skeletons of a series of 5 of these double burials indicate that in all cases the female skeleton was a century or more older than the male. Thus we have proof of a generational matrifocal society and a suggestion of a matrilocal postmarital residence pattern. Now, in time, these agaric farming people adopted the simple chiefdom solution to the problems inherent in primitive agriculture. Accordingly, grave goods of clothing, ceramic drinking vessels, bronze weapons, and ornaments begin to show differences in wealth. Notably important is that these wealth differentials are greatest at sites in the arid sector of the agaric culture area. This is where an emerging center with greater authority exists because of the essential planning and irrigation necessary in such areas. This is evidence for emerging hereditary stratification. On the other hand, such rank differentials should demonstrate evidence that some were eating better than others in the skeletal evidence. It does not yet do so. Now this is proof, therefore, that Argaric chiefdoms were still in their simple pre-ATC phase. Furthermore, the most completely published Argaric village sites at El Picacho, Gatas, Penalosa, and Fuente Alamo have houses that prove rank stratification was only incipient. Some houses are bigger than others, but there is no prima facie evidence for chiefly residences. There are no claims for the association of wealthier burials with larger residences. Likewise, there is little monumentality in public architecture. Large public spaces or plazas are not evident, and the only buildings interpretable as public or official buildings are the freestanding rectangular structures labeled H and O, built during phases 3 and 4 of the Fuente Alamo occupation. Now these are carbon copies, typologically speaking, of the USA Southwest chapels. Both are modest in size, about 50 meters square and 80 meters squared respectively. Mature settlements show some differentiation in size due to their chiefdom levels of social organization. The later Fuente Alamo large-scale grain milling facility proves that its residents received grain from communities elsewhere. However, the limited scale of sizes of villages ranges from 9 acres to hamlets of a fraction of an acre. ATCs always show much more differentiation. An Argaric society was a simple chiefdom for a long time, and farming households were self-sufficient and unspecialized in their production. There was a multiplicity of small settlements throughout the Argaric zone. This is typical of tribal agriculture and simple chiefdoms, where small groups of households are free to build new communities as they will. When wealth differentials occur or arose due to inherent competition over land and herds, the easy road out was just that. In time, some of these communities decided to intensify in situ agriculture and to do so with a more powerful central authority, and as always in such cases, the objective preparation for a unifying religion then existed. Indeed, these conditions appear first in the arid zone, where environmental constraints would have sharpened such competition and thus the preparation extant. The Bronze Valenciano and the Mancha Bronze Age archaeological cultures are contemporaneous to the Argaric and grade into it seamlessly along their frontier in northern Jaén and Murcia provinces. The only substantive contrast lies in the scarcity of burials inside these latter settlements. Now, the Bronze Valenciano occurs in the mountains and adjacent coast of eastern Spain, between the rivers Ebro and Segura. Now, this is an area where climate and resources are broadly similar to the less arid portions of the Argaric domain. The Mancha Bronze Age is found in the southeastern Meseta, north of the Sierra Morena and Bentic mountain systems. This region has a more arid and continental climate than the Spanish Levant, but conditions are in no way as unfavorable to agriculture as in the coastal Argaric zone. Now, the advance into the ATC, that is the Advanced Theocratic Chiefdom stage. Both the Bronze Valenciano and the Mancha Bronze Age have many small settlements, usually placed on hilltops, promontories, or other defensible positions. In the Alta Palencia district within the Bronze Valenciano area, for example, 50 open settlements, that is open air settlements as opposed to caves or rock shelters, are documented in an area of a little over 1,000 square kilometers. A survey of 10,000 square kilometers in northern Albacete province in the Mancha Bronze Age area documented the existence of some 250 Bronze Age settlements. Site densities of a similar order of magnitude are found wherever archaeologists have worked systematically. Now, the Mancha Bronze Age is distinguished by the construction of fortified settlements built on a circular plan in areas where the natural relief affords insufficient protection. And there are good photographs of this available on the internet. El Azuer and El Asaquion are the best known examples. Subsistence patterns on the mode of production are the same as for the Agaric. The same range of domesticates were husbanded. In short, the mode of production was mixed farming with the use of the plow and work animals also used for their secondary products. In terms of artifact technology, what mainly distinguishes the Bronze Valenciano and Mancha Bronze Age from the Agaric is the absence of some of the more distinctive Agaric productions, such as ceramic chalices and bronze swords and halberds. In the Agaric, these are only found in burials, and burials are scarce in the Bronze Valenciano and Mancha Bronze Age areas. Now, the Mancha Bronze Age circular fortified settlements and the differential possession of articles of production, such as the 107-gram ivory button from El Asaquion, prove high-rank occupations. Our most reliable current evidence for assessing social differentiation is the settlement pattern obtained in systematic surveys, namely the pattern of many small sites and the small size of the larger sites. Cola Caballo is the largest site documented in the area surveyed by Professor Antonio Gilman and associates. It is more than an acre in size and is proof of an ATC social organization. Emergent at Cerro de la Encantada is evidence for the ATC religious cult that must now be required for the socio-cultural law-governed evolutionary process. In summary, the makers of the foregoing record were largely self-sufficient households of mixed farmers engaging in maturing agricultural production. In the course of that life way, they had become part of a simple chiefdom that itself developed incipient social ranking. The archaeological record does not document a particular ancient historic society, but rather an ancient way of life shared by many groups. And this brings us to the advanced theoretic chiefdom stage, where the Neolithic revolution is completed. The Anta Grande do Sambujeira in Evora, Portugal, dates 5900 and 5500 BP. By 5500 BP, Perdigos in Regendos de Montserrat was occupied. It has a necropolis and cromlech. The Almadres cromlech site in Evora has megaliths dating from 5500 for 1,000 years to 4500 BP. And ATCs include the dolmen of Cunabaja in Mangualde municipality dating 4500 to 3000 BP. The cave of Solemos was used as a burial ground during this Neolithic period, and the settlements of Castellet de Banyoles in Tavisa, Lucentum, and Castel de Fels Castle are among the most important ATCs of northeast Iberia. Tavisa had the treasure of Tavisa collection of Iberian silver. The mausoleum of Pozo Moro near Chinchilla de Monte Aragon in Castilla-La Mancha was the biggest ATC, and at any rate these Iberians traded pottery and metalwork throughout the Mediterranean. Their pottery occurs in France, Italy, and North Africa, and in the remains of Greek colonies in Emporium, Rhodes, and Hemeroscopion. In the latter regard are statues such as the Lady of Bossa and the Lady of Else, made by Iberians schooled in Greek techniques. Thucydides says that one of the three original tribes of Sicily, the Sicani, was Iberian in origin. His idea of Iberia probably included Gaul. ATC Iberians had contacts with the Phoenicians, who had established various colonies in southern Andalusia. Their first colony on the Iberian Peninsula was founded in 3100 BP, and it was originally called Gadir, later renamed by the Romans as Gades, now is known as Cadiz. Other Phoenician colonies in southern Iberia included Malaga, Seshi, and Abdera. And that brings us to the Los Millares archetype of an advanced theocratic chiefdom that existed between 5300 and 4200 BP. Los Millares is a prehistoric site 10 miles north of Almera in the municipality of Santa Fe de Mondujar, Andalusia, Spain. That is, in other words, about halfway from Valencia to Cadiz. In its time, it held 1,000 people over 5 acres with 3 concentric lines of stone walls. The outer wall is the largest, running more than 650 feet, with 19 bastions and a gate guarded by an embankment and a tower. 4 smaller outlying stone forts guarded the road leading to the gate. This ATC had a separated cemetery of 80 passage grave tombs. Inside the walls was a cluster of simple dwellings and one large building. The latter contained evidence of copper smelting. Pottery excavated from the site included plain and decorated wares, including what Spanish archaeologists called symbol ceramic bowls, bearing oculus motifs that are gods as human faces. These symbol ceramic bowls are diagnostic of the Spanish Copper Stone Age, or Chalcolithic, and the early Bronze Age. Their defining characteristics are highly stylized designs, including the oculus motif. Another example of these ocular motifs is in Morbihan, France, where they are called Karnak megaliths. Similar designs appear on various carved stone idols found at Los Millares. Some of the farming people at Los Millares had become professional specialists in the smelting and forming of copper articles. Therefore, the Los Millares site is an archetype of the transition from simple chiefdom to an ATC of the Spanish Bronze Age, and that came to dominate the entire Iberian Peninsula. The population of Los Millares has been estimated at approximately 1,000 in the time frame of 5300 to 4200 BP. Considerable labor was involved in its construction. Many large stones had to be collected and quarried for their geometric characteristics. The sophisticated design proves professional architects at work, and all these facts further prove the ATC stage ultimate classification of this site that had initially been occupied by tribal agriculturalists. These people had transformed autochthonously into simple chiefdoms and then resolved their internal contradictions, as all such polities must if they are to continue onward and upward as ATCs. This brings us to the subject of the bell beaker Calpuli from an Iberian ATC. Beginning by 5000 BP, the Iberian Copper Stone Age, or Chalcolithic, witnessed the transformation of some simple chiefdoms into advanced theocratic chiefdoms. A Portuguese archetype is the Tagus Estuary ATC. It had a highly distinctive rank of trading Calpuli we call the bell beaker traders, who specialized in the sale of copper articles and production. By 4800 BP, it had a maritime arm that sailed to the Baltic, the Near East, and North Africa. The bell beaker trading rank was a Calpuli whose name reflects the history of archaeology in considering their activities as the spread of a bell beaker culture. As such, it is seen in the literature as an archaeological culture of prehistoric Western and Central Europe. We know its appearance starts in the late Neolithic or Chalcolithic and continues into the early British terminological Bronze Age, 4900 to 3800 BP, and we shall emphasize its importance as proof that a highly ranked social system existed. Among the high ranks were the masters of Mexican-style Calpulli. At any rate, the culture scattered throughout Western Europe precisely because it represented trading posts. These traders originated in coastal Iberia. They were familiar with northern Africa and in time spread their trade to the Danubian plains, the British Isles, and the islands of Sicily and Sardinia. The bell beaker culture follows the corded ware culture, and for north-central Europe, the funnel beaker culture. The term was coined by John Abercrombie based on the culture's distinctive pottery beakers, which he interpreted as drinking vessels. The bell beaker phenomenon in the Iberian Peninsula defines the late phase of the local Chalcolithic and even intrudes in the earliest centuries of the Bronze Age. A review of radiocarbon dates for the bell beaker across Europe found that some of the earliest were found in Portugal, where they range from Zambugal and Cerro de la Virgen in Spain, and they ran between 2900 and 2500 BC, in contrast to the rather later range for Andalusia, 2500 to 2200 BC. Now, no internal chronology for the various bell beaker related styles has been achieved yet for Iberia. Peninsular corded bell beakers are found in coastal or near coastal regions in the Western Pyrenees, the lower Ebro, and the adjacent east coast, and the northwest including Galicia and northern Portugal. A corded zone maritime variety, proposed to be a hybrid between the AOC and maritime herringbone, was found in burial contexts and expanded westward, especially along the mountain systems of the Meseta. With some notable exceptions, most Iberian early bell beaker burials are at or near the coastal regions. In Iberian settlements and on monuments, beaker pottery is found in association with local chalcolithic material. There it is as an intrusion from the 3rd millennium in burial monuments whose origin may go back to the 4th or 5th millennium BC. Very early dates for bell beakers were found in the Castelo Velho de Frejo de Numao in Guarda, northern Portugal. The site was located on the summit of a spur. A short-lived first occupation of pre-bell beaker building phase, about 3000 BC, revealed the remains of a tower, some paving, and structures for burning. After a break of 1 or 2 centuries, bell beaker pottery was introduced in a second building phase that lasted into the early Bronze Age, about 1800 BC, and a third building phase followed directly and lasted to about 1300 BC, after which the site was covered with layers of stone and clay, apparently deliberately, and abandoned. The second building phase was dominated by a highly coherent group of pottery within the regional chalcolithic styles, representing maritime bell beakers of the local northern Portuguese penteada decoration style in various patterns using lines of points, incision, or impression. 3 of them were carbon dated to the first half of the 3rd millennium BC. The site demonstrates a notable absence of more common bell beaker pottery styles, such as the maritime herringbone and maritime lined varieties found in nearby sites like Castanero do Vento and Crosto de Paleros. One non-local bell beaker potsherd, however, belonging to the upper part of a beaker with a curved neck and thin walls, was found at the bedrock base in this second phase. The second and patterning are classic forms in the context of pure European and peninsular corded ware. In the Iberian Peninsula, this type was restricted to half a dozen scattered sites in the Western Pyrenees, the Lower Ebro, and the Spanish East Coast. A vessel at Filomena, at Villarreal, Castellon, Spain, has parallels with the decoration. In Porto Torao, at Inner Alentejo, in southern Portugal, a similar vessel was found having a date between 2823 and 2658 BC. All pottery was locally made. The lack or presence of bell beaker elements is the basis for the division of Los Millares and Villanova cultures into 2 periods, 1 and 2. Radiocarbon dating currently indicates a 1200-year duration for the use of beaker pottery on the Balearic Islands between about 2475 BC and 1300 BC. There has been some evidence of all corded pottery in Majorca, generally considered the most ancient bell beaker pottery, possibly indicating an even earlier beaker settlement about 2700 BC. However, in several regions, this type of pottery persisted long enough to permit other possibilities. Suarez Otero postulated these corded beakers entered the Mediterranean by routes both through the Atlantic coast and through eastern France. Bell beaker pottery has been found in Majorca, Formentera, but has not been observed in Menorca or Ibiza. Collective burials and dolmen structures in Ibiza could be contrasted against the individual burials in Majorca. In its latest phase, 1750 to 1300 BC, the local beaker context became associated with the distinctive ornamented boquique pottery, demonstrating maritime links with the megalithic coastal regions of Catalonia, directly related to the late Cogotas complex. In most of the areas of the mainland, boquique pottery falls into the later stages of the bell beaker complex. During the earlier beaker period in the Balearics, that is 2400 to 2000 BC, there are elephant ivory objects together with beaker pottery. This maritime contact has a long tradition, dating to the initial spread of seafaring colonists with clear continuity in different regional and intrusive traditions. The presence of perforated beaker pottery for making cheese at Son Fernandel Olesa confirms the introduction of production and conservation of dairy. The presence of spindles at Son Fernandel Olesa and Esvelar do Prop prove knowledge of making thread and textiles from wool. However, more details on the strategies for tending and slaughtering the domestic animals involved are forthcoming, being traditionally associated with the introduction of metallurgy. The first traces of copper working in the Balearics was also closely associated with bell beakers. By 4350 BP, the first phase of flint dagger manufacture and use was a period of social change. An institutionalized apprenticeship system existed, and this proves incipient professional specialization. Father was teaching craftsmanship to son. Therefore, these families chose to live near abundant resources of high-quality flint. Debbie Olauson's investigation proves that flint napping in the manufacture of daggers reflects this incipient craft specialization in the form of a division of labor between households. The adoption of European-style woven wool clothes kept together by pins and buttons stands in contrast to the earlier usage of clothing made of leather and plant fibers. Two-aisle timber houses in late Neolithic Denmark correspond to similar houses in southern Scandinavia and at least parts of central Scandinavia and lowland northern Germany. In Denmark, this mode of building houses is clearly rooted in a Middle Neolithic tradition. In general, late Neolithic house building styles were shared over large areas of northern and central Europe. Towards the transition to LN2, some farmhouses became extraordinarily large. The cultural concepts originally adopted for beaker groups at the Lower Rhine blended or integrated with local late Neolithic culture. For a while, the region was set apart from central and eastern Denmark. That was related to the early Untitled culture across the Baltic Sea. Before the turn of the millennium, the typical beaker features had gone, their total duration being 200-300 years at the most. A similar picture of cultural integration is featured among the bell beakers in Central Europe, thus challenging previous theories of bell beakers as an elitist or purely superstructural phenomenon. The connection with the East Group beakers of Unities had intensively considered in LN2, thus triggering a new social transformation and innovations in metallurgy that it would announce the actual beginning of the Northern Bronze Age. Now, as to the physical anthropology. Initial physical anthropological analysis by European investigators was aimed at determining racial type differences among the skeletons of the bell beaker people from earlier populations and was concentrated on the skulls. These craniometric observations classified the bell beaker skulls as brachycephalic, or short and broad in the face. This craniotomy fit with their tall height and heavily built chassis. At that time, this correlated well with the idea that these people were practicing farming rather than hunting and gathering. Thus, they had a better diet for maximizing stature and body girth. It became apparent to researchers in the latter half of the 20th century that a better explanation should be found for them that stressed cultural continuity. And my conclusion is that what we have is an intermixture of traders carrying the bell beaker crafts by interbreeding with local populations as they moved along their trading routes, as happens in all such cases of culture contact. Furthermore, in the British Isles, the Carpathian Basin, south-central Germany, northern Spain, and southern France, and the Czech Republic, the physical anthropology is demonstratively clear. There is a distinct difference between the incoming bell beaker people and the indigenous populations. This is a period of initial contact, but given time, as shown in dental studies on skulls from northern Spain and the Czech Republic, there is melding and continuity, as one would also expect from longer-term culture contact between traders and indigenous populations. And that brings us to a conclusion of our discussion of the chiefdom stages in Iberia. And in the next chapter, in lecture, we're going to discuss the first kingdoms in the Iberian Peninsula. And of course, that is also the period where the most advanced theocratic chiefdoms become class divided, state organized polities we call kingdoms, and are the first stage of the slave period.